heard the conventional view.
Now prepare yourself to hear the other side.
High school teachers Mike Margison and Justin Spears bring you the alternative view you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are, Margison and Spears.
That's right. A Monday night edition of The Other Side. Welcome to everybody out there. I am Justin Spears. With you as always, and with me as always is Mr. Mike Margison. Mike, what's going on tonight, man?
Not much. Just trying to get used to this Monday routine here.
Yeah, we've kind of had to bounce around here a little bit, but we appreciate you joining in and listening to us, whether you're listening live tonight on YouTube or you're catching our show on one of our many platforms. We are a part of the Cerberus Radio Network, some great talent, great shows. Suzanne Sherman, Dan Bailey, Jeff Johnson. You've got The Paradigm Shift, The Dan Bailey Show, The Renegade and Rambler Show, Suzanne's show, The Wasatch Report. Man, she's been on fire. She's had some great guests here recently. She's got a very special guest with her coming up with Mr. Mark Kreslins, who is a great mind out of the state of Oklahoma. So you can catch our programming on the Cerberus Radio Network's Radio Co channel Monday through Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You can get us on iTunes, Google Play, the Spreaker Radio app. Just search for The Other Side with Margison and Spears. You can catch us locally here in the state of Indiana out of Crawfordsville, 92.1, 1550 AM, WCVLAM.com online. Our show is on there Saturday mornings at 8 a.m., and we really appreciate the support that we get from Mr. Dave Peach and the gang over there at WCVL. So just really lots of different ways in which you can catch The Other Side. And I tell you what, Mike, we've built some momentum here, I feel like, and I've had some people reach out to me. I know we've been we've been pleading to people that, hey, if there is anything that you can recommend to us or questions, comments, feedback, we've been getting some of that here recently. So the biggest thing that you can do for us is just to help continue spread the word, share the show, share links through social media. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all that jazz. So really stoked and really excited for some of the positive traction that we've gotten with the show, and we hope that continues here. So we're going to jump right into it this evening. Mike and I have been having these conversations about what seems to be successful and what we like, and we kind of both agreed that more of the modern current event flavor seems to play well with our audience, and we seem to get the most feedback and views out of that. And we certainly want to continue to give credence to historical events and everything, but we thought we'd kind of keep with more of a current event trend. Now that we're coming up on the midterm elections here this year, and obviously we're on the heels of our primaries tomorrow. I know there's a big primary here in the state of Indiana at the Senate level. We've got 3 Republicans that are just really duking it out here in our state, and that's been a topic of discussion to kind of then talk about, when you see these campaign promises and you listen to journalists talk about predictions of if this guy's elected, what's going to happen. And Mike came to me and said, you know what, we need to talk about what the media was saying our lives would be like today if and when President Trump got elected. Well, let me back up. They never thought he would get elected. Let's make that clear, right? And so it was more of like once he was elected, the sky is falling, Chicken Little type thing. And it was like, everything is just going to come crashing down. So,
well, I think, hold on, Justin, I think you and I would have been fine because we're white males.
Oh yes, we've got to obviously acknowledge that, right? That would have skewed everything for us. We would have been safe, right? Because we didn't fall into one of the categories that would have definitely been targeted by this administration. So why don't we start there tonight, Mike? And I'm going to talk a little bit here in a minute about more of the Trump campaign promises. But I know you came to me and you said, hey, I want to talk about what all the media hacks were saying our lives would be like. And I know this is always an interesting category. So take us through and smarten us up a little bit here on some of what the media was saying, our lives should look like today based on the predictions that they made here after President Trump was elected into office.
Well, yeah, no problem. One of the things that really bugs me is that nobody's ever held accountable for this. And I just wanted to go through and kind of remind people of what the left was saying. Well, I guess not just the left, but there were a lot of Republicans as well. All of the anti-Trumpers will just say, everybody who was anti-Trump, what they were saying this country would be. after Trump's election. And they were so stupid then. And we were saying, okay, this is ridiculous. This is hysterical. And they were pleading and they were insistent. And then nobody is ever held accountable for these. And I think somebody should have to answer for what they said 2 years ago when they said this country was basically doomed. And what I'm going to be doing here, these are not like fringe kook Instagram users that I'm going to be talking about. These are mainstream influential outlets, places where you would expect bias is fine, but reasonable news. And I want to start with the New York Times, which is, I mean, I don't know circulation numbers, but would it be fair to say, Justin, it's probably the most widely read newspaper in the United States? I don't know if that's true, but it's got to be close, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably up there in the top five.
So we'll just say one of the most widely read newspapers in the United States, and their Nobel Prize-winning economist and economic contributor Paul Krugman wrote on the night of Trump's election. He said, if the question is, when will the markets recover? And what he's talking about here is that the Dow plunged after there was a big sell-off in Asia after news that Trump won the election. And the Dow plunged several hundred points right after that. And it looked like it was just going to be chaos. And so Krugman took to the keyboard here and he typed, now this is a Nobel Prize winning economist. And he says, if the question is when markets will recover, comma, a first pants answer is never. Okay. This is what he said. The markets will never recover. And there's a picture on his blog post here of a guy on the New York Stock Exchange holding his hand over his mouth, like in shock. And the title of this particular article, I don't know if it was an article or if it was just a blog post, but it was in the opinion section of the New York Times, is What Happened on Election Day. And it says, Paul Krugman, the economic fallout. And so what actually has happened to the stock market? Well, that sell-off it proved to be very, very short-lived, and the market has made almost historic gains since that. I think it was hovering right around 18,000, and anybody can go and check this if I'm off by a couple hundred. I'm admitting that right now, but it was hovering right around 18,000 in November of 2016, and it's up to about 24,000 now. So that's a major gain in the first 2 years. Now, look, I will be the first to say that you should not attribute stock market gains to a president. And I've said that for a long time under both Democratic and Republican presidents. This isn't something that they should take credit for, largely because both Republican and Democrat presidents are in favor of irresponsible monetary policy. And when you have loose money policies like that, a lot of that money gets channeled into the stock market, and the gains are largely artificial, but they look good. But the benefit to this is it does increase consumer confidence, I guess, when people feel wealthier, even if they're not really wealthier. And the economy has been responding pretty well. We're at about 3.9% unemployment. But the larger issue here is a guy like Paul Krugman, who is the chief economist for the New York Times, if he says, yeah, markets will never recover, then it's almost like any fringe kook can say I mean, anybody could have said that, but that's a completely irresponsible thing to say. And he's actually been taken to task a little bit for that, but not nearly as much as he should. And he's, responded, okay, well, I was just writing out of emotion. Well, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're an economist and you're supposed to be respected here. But the economy did not do what people said it was going to do under Trump. We have a booming stock market. We have, let me repeat this, 3.9% unemployment. I mean, look, and I have also been saying in the past that because of irresponsible, both fiscal and monetary policies, we are due for a crash. But there is no denying that the economic vehicle is running very strong right now. Okay, so that's how about mass deportations? This was a two-word term that we often heard leading up to the Trump election. In fact, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Justin, but again, anybody can go and look this up. The Boston Globe ran an article sometime before the election, and they ran it with a fake headline, and they put a fake date on it that was, a couple of months into the Trump presidency. And it said, the big headline in the front was like mass deportations to begin. and it says President Trump calls for tripling of ICE force and riots continue. And so this was just kind of like a what the Boston Globe said about this is the headline that we hope we never have to write. And they were saying this a couple of months before the election, but we heard a lot about this. Mass deportations, and CNN has written several times that, with the restructuring of ICE, we're going to expect mass deportations. And I keep hearing this. And if you listen to the media and you listen about how racist Trump is, you would expect, there would have to be mass deportations. Well, let's look at the actual figures of deportation under President Trump, and then let's look at the figures under President Obama. So 2009, first year that Obama took office, deportations in total, right around 400,000, a little bit less in the 390s. They inched up slightly, high 390,000s in the next year, 2010. They went directly up to 400,000 in 2011. They peaked in 2012 at 409,000 deportations. So that was the high water mark for President Obama in his first 4 years. Now, what was it in the first fiscal year under Trump, fiscal year 2017? 226,000 deportations. Now, let me repeat that for anybody listening and anybody who cares about the truth or just reasonable conversation when it comes to politics. President Obama, for the first 4 years of his term, deported on average 400,000 people. In his first year, President Trump deportations, 226,000. Yet which one is the racist who hates Mexicans? Well, of course, it's Trump. And you know what? You're going to hear this. Leftists are going to come out and say, oh, yeah, but you're reading the numbers wrong. You can't look at border deportations. You have to look at interior deportations. And if you look at interior deportations, they're way higher. That's just false. Yeah, it's true that there are fewer border deportations under Trump because Mexicans are they basically stopped coming to the border. The Border Patrol has acknowledged that. They have a lot less to do since Trump has become presidency. So yeah, there are fewer, but there are fewer interior deportations. When you hear that, it's just a lie. For those first 4 years, average interior deportations under Barack Obama were about 150,000. First year under Trump, it was 81,000, almost half of that. So by the numbers, immigration by the numbers, Trump has deported far fewer than Obama ever did. And you never heard this type of hysteria from the media, who just fawned over every little thing that President Obama did. Yet Trump, he's this Hitlerian character. He is racist. He is anti-Mexican. And we are going to see mass deportations. No, we haven't. We have not seen mass deportations. Okay, I got to move through these kind of quickly, Justin, because there's so many of them. I'm going to move on to anti-LGBT. We were hearing that, especially with Mike Pence coming onto the ticket and being the vice president, this was just going to be an outright assault on the LGBT community. And I went to Lambda Legal, which is a very kind of prominent LGBT legal site, and they have a lot of articles about this. And I pulled up an article from 2017. It was called "Trump's Judicial Assault on LGBT Rights," and I had to read through this because I remember I don't remember any specific policies where Trump assaulted LGBT rights. And you know what they're referring to? His Supreme Court, basically Neil Gorsuch. Yeah. They can't name a single a bill that was passed by this administration. And look, ask anybody on the other side, any leftist, okay, which anti-LGBT laws have been passed since the Trump-Pence team took over? They won't be able to say one. If they're smart, most of them don't pay attention to anything. I'm talking about leftists, not LGBT, but they're going to start saying, oh, well, he's nominated federal judges who will do this and do that. Just talk about the judges who will interpret the law and not bend it to their political leanings. But that is the only thing. And I read through this entire thing. This article was titled "Trump's Judicial Assault on LGBT Rights." And there's just nothing in here. It's just the fact that he's hired or he's appointed judges that they don't like. And that these judges might make rulings that are anti-LGBT, but there's been nothing so far. And then there was another article by Vox, which I probably shouldn't even read from Vox, but it is influential because a lot of people read it. And it said Trump's first year was, let's see, how did they word this thing? Trump's first year was awful for LGBTQ rights. That was the name of the article. And again, so I said, okay, I have to read through this and see. Now, I knew that this was going to come. They were going to talk about the attempted transgender military ban. And essentially what this is saying is that we don't want taxpayers paying for gender reassignment surgery for people in the military. Okay, this is an all-out assault on the LGBT community. Seriously, can we at least be reasonable here? And do any of these people have to go back and look at their words and say, all right, that was a little bit hysterical. We were a little bit emotional. This is wrong. No, they're never required to. I mean, nobody ever brings this up, and these people are never required to revisit these idiotic things that they say. If you were to believe what this country was going to turn into, you would think that homosexuals were being locked up in prison just for being homosexuals. You would think that Mexicans are being rounded up no matter what. We're not checking to see if you're legal, illegal. We're not going to serve you. We're going to put you in vans and we're going to take you across the border. That's the way that they were talking, and nothing like that has happened. It's absolutely ridiculous. All right, moving on to the next one. Education, Betsy DeVos. We had fun with this, Justin, obviously, because we're educators and we know how little influence the Secretary of Education actually has on what we do in the classroom. But you remember the way that teachers were acting when DeVos got confirmed, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was just it was like you've been saying, hysteria.
Yeah, it was comical. And they were just going, no, this is going to be the end of education. Kids are going to be stupid. They're not going to be able to read, and blah, 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 and over and over. And I'm reading this. One of the common things that they said was that Betsy DeVos bought herself the position, that she had donated so much that she basically, inherited this, or she, purchased the position. And all of this was wrong. She was not a Trump supporter. If you go back and look at her during the campaign, she did not support Trump at all and did not donate to him at all. And so a lot of the media institutions, they had to kind of rewrite what they were saying. They, okay, fine, she didn't donate directly to Trump, but in the past she donated to Reagan and George W. Bush. I mean, just imagine that. How evil is that? But the big thing about Betsy DeVos that they were saying is that she was a non-educator. She never attended public schools. She was rich, and so that was just immediately a major strike. But she just didn't know anything about education because she was never an educator and she never went to public schools themselves. And I just went back and I started thinking, I was actually so glad when I came across this. I didn't think that Arnie Duncan was an educator. I mean, I didn't think, but I didn't know for sure. I thought he was a business major at Harvard. And so, those of you who don't know, this was Barack Obama's pick for Secretary of Education, who was confirmed when Obama was, or shortly after Obama was inaugurated in 2009. And yeah, you have Arnie Duncan, non-educator. He was a business guy from Harvard who was appointed CEO of Chicago Public Schools. And you know what? Arnie Duncan never attended public schools. He went to the University of Chicago Lab School when he was a kid. And Justin, do you want to know what the tuition was to send your kid to the University of Chicago Lab School? It's a private school. It's not public. $30,000 a year. That's what his parents paid to have Arnie go to a private, nice private school education. I thought the argument was if you didn't go to public school, you're automatically not qualified. No, that's only if you're a Republican. And of course, she gets no points for being a woman, and Arnie Duncan gets a pass for being a man. But we'll forget about that. But not only that, I'm reading this education journal. This is back in 2009, and they're talking about Arnie Duncan. And they were saying, see, he was brought on as CEO of Chicago Public Schools by Richard Daley back when he was brought out of Harvard. He was a non-educator, and this is how he got into education. He was brought in to be the CEO of Chicago Public Schools to reform it. And you know what he did? His methods were privatization. That's what he did, and it was being hailed by Democrats. I'm reading here from a education journal. For the past several years, Chicago's model of school closing and education privatization has received national attention as another beacon of urban education reform. Can you believe I just said those words? School closings. They're hailing them. If one single school closes under Betsy DeVos, there will be riots in this country. I'm going to read on here. As Chicago Mayor Daley said in a 2006 press conference, quote, together in 12 years, we have taken Chicago public school system from the worst in the nation to a national model for urban school reform. Okay, that's part's wrong. They're still worst in the nation. Chicago Commercials Club Renaissance Schools Fund Symposium says, free to choose, free to succeed, the new market in public education. Washington Post claims, quote, Chicago school reform could be a U.S. model. They're talking about free to choose, free to succeed. They're talking about free market education, and leftists are hailing it. And you bring in somebody like DeVos and they say, oh my gosh, this is the end. This just goes to show how absolutely insanely and militantly political these people are. It's like they don't have a brain. They're only reduced to talking points. That's the only thing that they can do. I want to finish up here, Justin, and I want to talk about the internet. I shouldn't even be able to look this stuff up. Net neutrality. The internet should be down, or I should be paying $100 an hour to use it, because that's what we were told was going to happen under net neutrality. Okay, I've got a bigger list, but I've got to stop. But those are the ones I wanted to get through. What you're going to be doing here is really interesting. You're taking another approach to it. Trump made a bunch of look, we're being pretty fair here. Trump made a bunch of grandiose promises when he was campaigning, and those haven't come through either. Now, he is held a little bit more accountable because the media hates him, but let's talk a little bit about the stuff that Trump said he was going to do that he's not doing.
Yeah, and I want to preface what I'm going to go through here pretty quickly and just kind of say that I think what the takeaway that you should get from this, to those of you in the audience listening, is understand what we always talk about in terms of understanding the importance of reading through the Constitution and understanding the roles of the branches of our government. And that is, and I talk about this a lot in my U.S. government class with my seniors, let's examine the ever-changing role of the presidency. I mean, there's no doubt that, I know we always like to play, what if the founders were alive today? What would they think and all that? And I honestly, as I've thought about that question a lot, I think this is the one thing that I think they would say, man, we knew this was going to happen, because Benjamin Franklin warned us about this position of presidency and what it would look like. And I guess what I'm getting to with all this is we now have a legislator in chief. We have a legislator in chief, and we see this played out in no greater form than when the president is campaigning. And you listen to these promises that are made on the campaign trail, and it makes you want to pull your hair out, because if you're paying attention, you're following along, the first thing you should be saying is you don't have the authority to do that. That's not your job. That's Congress's job. And I know you kind of hinted at this when you talked about the president being tied to the economy. Nowhere in the Constitution does it grant the president any authority on commerce or the economy. Maybe you could make a little bit of a connection on some of what he would be able to do, but it would be very, very loose. And even in the legislative branch, right? Even in Congress, this whole idea that we've talked about, and you can go back in our archives and listen to the shows that we've done talking about the clauses of the Constitution, the necessary and proper, the interstate commerce, even those should be limited. So I want to kind of make that caveat here, and understanding that much of what the president and that goes for politicians in general make on promises on the campaign trail, really the first thing that you should be asking yourself is, wait a second, is that an authoritarian power that is granted to this person, an authority or a power that's granted to this person? And so when you listen to some of these things, right, this is what we should be listening to. And the first one right off the bat, right, I mean, what I'm using here is PolitiFact, and their kind of truth meter that they use. This is a website that's been dedicated to going back to the Obama administration, and it now has grown to obviously Trump and Congress in general, keeping these guys and gals honest on what their promises are. So the number one promise that they have rated that President Trump made while he was candidate Trump is the repeal of Obamacare. And again, right off the bat, when you hear that campaign promise, you should be saying that is not an authority that is granted to the president of the United States. That would be an act that would need to be delivered through Congress. And when you look at this, why did this blow up in his face so bad? Well, because the Republican Party is so fractured and splintered today that he couldn't secure the votes of the Freedom Caucus, right? This group of more conservative, kind of the Rand Paul, Thomas Massey group of Republicans in the House that weren't going for what was being proposed. And so you had this just epic showdown between Republicans in the House. Even though they had a majority, they couldn't get it through because they couldn't get everybody on the same page. And I was actually kind of remember cheering this on when it happened, because I'm thinking, this is what the system is all about. It's not about having a supermajority in the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office. It's about guys that are holding true to principles and not to party politics. And so, again, I think that kind of came back to bite the president in the end, because there again, he's out making a campaign promise that he can't deliver on because it's not in his authority, in his power in Article 2 of the Constitution to be able to repeal legislation. So again, I think that's a really important thing. Number two, build the wall and make Mexico pay for it. This has been an unmitigated disaster, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you look at it. I mean, look, let's be honest, anything that has gone on in as far as discussions with this has simply been there to kind of appease people. Hey, I'm going down to look at prototypes. Hey, I'm talking, he tweets all this stuff out. I'm going down to look at, different models and, we're really close. And no, you're not. You're nowhere close to doing this, and you're nowhere close to making Mexico pay for it. Every time you try to flex your political muscles in terms of trade or anything related to foreign policy, you get smacked down. I just saw a story the other day on TV where the Chinese have cut orders of soybeans that they normally get because they're frustrated with the tariffs that have been placed on certain goods. This is blowing up in his face. Quickly on here, just to kind of wrap up, number three, the whole idea of the suspended immigration from terror-prone places, that thing was a disaster. Here again, that might be something there again that you could say, well, there's a little bit more authority because you could, put it in under the protect the people, maybe safety and things of that nature. But again, immigration isn't something that is granted as an authority to any part of our government. That should be left up to the national government, I should say. That's a states' rights. Now, naturalization, that's a different story. But here again, this blew up in his face. We know it was challenged, I believe, in the Ninth Circuit. It became a disaster. He had to rewrite this executive order, and that really hurt. And then finally, the 2, 4, and 5 that are kind of lumped together are on taxes. Now, I would say of these top 5, that has probably been the closest thing. And I know he was out touting his tax cuts, but even there, he had to compromise with some of the what Democrats' demands. And I know, for example, I think he wanted to take the marginal tax rate for businesses from down to 15%. It was at 35% down to 15. He had to, kind of negotiate and meet in the middle at about 21%, I think, is where he was able to get it to. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there again, you promised to deliver 15% on the campaign trail, and yet not able to deliver on that. And again, much like you, Mike, I could keep going with more and more here. There's the ridiculous, Hillary Clinton, lock her up. Where are we with that?
Oh, God, I almost forgot about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just all these different things, and I think there's been, Russia and Stormy Daniels and all these other just sideshow, clown show, circus acts that have come through. And I think in a way, maybe, I'm not going to say he's thriving off of that, but I think he can manage those, from a PR perspective more than, again, if the press were holding him accountable to these promises, or if the American people, look, if the people were holding him accountable to this as well, where would he go with these things? I don't know. But, again, I think, guys, it's really important that when you hear a politician, and obviously I'm talking about an executive right now, but even at the legislative level with these primaries that are coming up. I'm listening to 3 Republicans duke it out for a chance to take on a Democrat senator in the state of Indiana, and it's just nauseating. These guys are going to do and say whatever they need to get elected, and once they get there, this whole drain the swamp thing, they're going to become part of the swamp. They're going to buy into the power and the party politics, and they're eventually just going to become a jaded version of what they proclaim they would do on the campaign trail. So that's, I think, where we're going to kind of move toward here as we move it into our bonus time. For those of you that are listening live on YouTube or that are catching us on rebroadcast, we're going to spend a couple more minutes here kind of wrapping up with some bonus time. For those of you that are listening on 1550 92.1 or WCVLAM.com, we're going to have to leave it here for today. We thank you for joining in with us on this Saturday morning, and be sure to catch us again next Saturday on 92.1 or 1550. But until then, you've now heard The Other Side. Okay, so for those that have stayed on board with us on YouTube, this is the part of the show where we kind of take it out to a little bit more bonus time, a little bit more informal back and forth here. And Mike, I know you had a tremendous amount of material there. I thought you did a fantastic job of walking us through, pretty well detailed there, some of these, predictions and things of that nature. I know that as I was talking a little bit there at the end about, the whole issue of, campaign trail promises. And I know this isn't anything new. This has been going on for a long time. But I know one of the questions that I ask my government students is, look, guys, why do we have such a low approval of Congress, yet we reelect the same people all the time, right? I think it's like a 10% approval rating, but yet reelection rates run almost 90%. There's clearly a disconnect there. Let's look at it, though, more from the side of what you were talking about. Why do we allow our media to get away with these types of things? So in other words, you went through a couple of different media outlets there, and we know the habitual offenders here, but, what is it going to take before we start to reject this stuff and become more free and independent thinkers?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else to do other than just to turn away from this stuff. And I don't read it regularly, but I do read it just to see what the other side is saying, so that I'm aware of it. But yeah, I mean, eventually people are just going to have to start tuning out. And for instance, I had for a long time, I had an ESPN Insider account just because I like to get, insider takes on the NFL and Major League Baseball and things like that. But I finally canceled it, and I can't. And I also liked reading the magazine and the articles and stuff. But it became so overtly political, and it still is. I mean, ESPN is basically just an arm for the left wing of the Democratic Party, and they just use sports as their platform. And they are probably the biggest race hustlers outside of Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton that I can think of. And so I just canceled my subscription about 1.5 years ago. And I said, I'm not putting up with this. I said, I'm not going to pay for this. But unless you start, and look, if you look at viewership and declining revenues for ESPN, I think more people are starting to do that. And they've had to lay off like hundreds of employees in the last year. 2017 was an especially bad year. But I think that's it. I mean, people just have to start kind of voting with their dollars and saying, I don't want to put up with, I want like honest journalism. I want to get back to, look, people should be critical of the president. Let me be very clear here. Journalists should be critical of the president, but they should be critical of Barack Obama, which this press was not at all. And they should be critical of Trump, but you should be critical of Trump. You shouldn't be on a warpath to get him impeached by using lies and literally fake news, which is what they do. So it's almost, the press has basically just become irrelevant now.
Yeah, I think that's important too. Is be critical of his record and not of, if I just kind of, you were saying that and it made me think about this. If a Republican or a right leaning a media outlet were to make predictions just simply based off of party affiliation, oh, this person's a Democrat and therefore they're going to do A, B, and C, they'd be excoriated, right? And so, be critical, but be critical of the record, not of the fact that, there's an R next to his name, or, he came from the business world, or whatever else, like you said, conjecture is floating around out there. Now, I'll tell you just real quickly too, what's really alarming to me is, and I don't know why I continue to do it, but I kind of make the daily rounds on the internet of a couple of different websites. I like to check out local news, which I tell you what, the Indy Star has become almost I mean, it's to the point where I read it out of just pure laughter now. And I've attacked Matthew Tolley and some of the other journalists over there for their just insanely idiotic positions. But it's scary when you go to places like Yahoo and you look at the stories that populate the front page, and it's Sugar Pop or Pop Sugar and Vox and all those different.
HuffPost gets a lot of FaceTime.
HuffPost gets just plastered all over the place there, and again, part of me, and I wish more people could be like this. Again, I look at it and I read it, but then I can quickly dismiss it. But I think so many people just take it for, the gospel, that it's written by these people from an emotional, passionate standpoint. And so they just buy in hook, line, and sinker without Mike, and I'm not just saying this to kiss up or anything, but man, when you went through what you went through, it was sourced, it was documented. I could tell just by, if I didn't know you from Adam and I was just listening to your account and presentation of those things, man, you put time and effort and you went through and you thought about it. I can tell you put thought into those things. You didn't just come to the table and say, well, I heard on NPR that the world's about to end.
I did, by the way. I was listening to NPR on the way home.
Did hear that. But it's just the fact that I don't think people do that enough, right? It's not like, you never hear people say like, you know what, HuffPost reported this, and I kind of heard that and I went, that doesn't sound right. And I went and I checked, and you know what? Sure enough, it wasn't. I never hear anybody from the left say that. No. And so I think that's an important aspect for people, to think about as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do on this podcast, we're not news reporters or we're not news analysts, but we are trying to convey information, and we have to be reasonable and we have to be careful about it. So there's basically just no room for and I know I get kind of emotional. You can probably tell in the volume of my voice when I start to get a little bit louder. That means I'm a little bit more passionate about it. Yeah, it's hit a nerve. But no, I appreciate that. And I want to talk about a little bit. I want to go back to what you were talking about at the end. And I ran a little bit long, and I do hope I didn't cut you short. But there was a few things that you were discussing that I wanted you to go a little bit further on. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about this concept of an executive order versus the process of a bill becoming a law, and why it's almost just kind of so widely accepted. Like these executive orders are just kind of widely accepted, and maybe even like, what are they? And this is not the way things are supposed to go. This isn't the way laws are supposed to be passed. Why is it happening this way?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's something that I spend about a day and a half with my government kids. And again, for those of you that hear me say, I spend a little bit of time on this, I really have to, because I teach in a trimester format. I've got 13 weeks to get through U.S. government, right? So good luck. So we really do fly through. So when I say I spend a day on this, I spend 70 minutes on it, and that's about all we got time for. But I think it's important for the kids to understand this, because, you're going to hear about this a lot in the media. especially during the first 100 days, right? So executive orders have been around from the beginning. They've existed since Washington was in office, and there is no, to my understanding, I'm not a constitutional lawyer or anything, but to my understanding, there is nothing when you read through it that says, oh, hey, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 5, the president shall have an executive order privilege where he can essentially skirt around the legislative process if he doesn't get along with Congress. There's nothing like that in there. I think if I remember correctly, it kind of got its bearings from the faithfully executed clause in the Constitution, that the laws be faithfully executed. And essentially it kind of started off as a way of like, look, if there's not clear guidance, because that's essentially what the president, the chief executive, is looking at. As law comes to him, he's going to, and regulation comes to him in his administration, he's essentially going to be looking for guidance as to, okay, you're telling me that you want this regulation imposed or you want this law enforced. How do I do that? Right. And so if there's not a lot of guidance, then the executive order essentially gives him the authority to look at his agencies and say, I grant you the authority to be able to do A, B, and C. I could have that botched. If somebody out there is listening, if I'm really wrong on that, please feel free to set me straight. But that's my understanding of executive orders. They don't carry the full weight of law in that they can be overturned by another president, right? So you might have heard about President Trump overturning some of President Obama's executive orders and so on and so forth. That's a tradition that's gone on for a long period of time. But again, these are just ways in which the president can get things done from an enforcement standpoint, again, without having to wait for Congress to go through the legislative process. So,
how do you think that the American electorate would respond, or do you think they would even care if somebody ran on a platform of, I'm going to do everything by the books? You know what I'm saying? We're going to go through Congress. I'm not going to conduct these pseudo wars without a declaration of war, things like that. How do you think people would respond to that? Or do you think they'd even care? Is it just so entrenched that the president is a king?
Yeah, no, I think they would care to a certain degree. And let me clarify what I mean by that. I do think that a lot of people look at the president as the legislator in chief, and they look for the president to be the chief problem solver. They look for the president, to be out ahead of whatever is going on, irregardless of if it's something that falls under his authority or not. And I think that's partly unfair to the president, but I also think it's partly, we need to be more educated on these things, because then it would more clearly guide us and direct us on where we need to focus our efforts. And so I think that, you would have somebody, if you had a candidate come through and really play it by the books, right? We hear people on the right a lot of times say, man, if we could just get back to the Constitution, if we had a president that strictly adhered to the power granted to him by the Constitution,
or
her, yeah, I should be fair, that I don't think that they would last. I really don't think they would last. I think they would get lambasted as a do-nothing, as weak, as lazy, and it would really just kind of fall apart, especially if it were a Republican. Right. And I think even a Democrat too, as well, because I think there would be an expectation that, hey, you've got this power. You've got the the most powerful position in the world, in the federal government. Do something, use it to do something, use it to provide health care to those who are in need, use it to provide the safety net of Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, use it to protect minorities, and so on and so forth. And again, I think if it were a Republican, it would be, hey, you're just letting states do whatever they want. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket, and you're just sitting back laughing and, yucking it up at the country club and whatever it might be that would be, lobbed their way. I don't think our American population and citizenry would recognize what this government would look like if it were run by the blueprint of what the Constitution has to say.
Man, that's a really great point. And you used a good term in there that I like. You said they would be characterized as a do-nothing president. And it's when you think back about the way that presidents are looked at in our despicable history books, who are the presidents that get the most press? The ones who did something, the ones who did the most. Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society and all the things he did in the war on poverty. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal and all of the things that he did. Teddy Roosevelt's Square Deal in the progressive area and all of the things that he did. It's just this idea of whoever is doing and doing and doing. And I think that's what people like so much about Barack Obama. He was going to do this and do that and get free healthcare. And if I'm hearing you correctly, nobody really cares what the Constitution says. I mean, is that it? Just nobody nobody cares anymore. Forget the Constitution. It's just an impediment. It's like an obstacle. It's a barrier for the king to do what they want.
Yeah, and you know the other thing that we've talked about too before in previous episodes, and I think it's true here as well. Freedom is hard. Liberty is hard. When you look somebody in the face and you say, I know you're having a tough go of it right now, but suck it up, Buttercup. Go out and do something for yourself. Quit whining, complaining about your situation. Quit looking to DC for a solution and figure out a way to overcome this. That American spirit that people talk about all the time, and we could get on into the rabbit hole about American exceptionalism and all that, but to stick to this narrow topic, the idea of when America was in its infancy and when we saw westward expansion, we saw people getting away. Leave me alone. Let me go out and do what I want to do with little to no hand from the federal government or even the state government for that matter into what I want to do. And that's when we were the most free. Now, that requires a lot of work on your part. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of hard work, but we have let that run by the wayside. Anytime we are met with pressure or adversity, we immediately turn to the government as our solution bearer. And then we wonder why people are so weak-minded today, why we can't overcome adversity and obstacles, because we're always looking for somebody else to provide us with the solution to our problems. And that's why I think we would never be able to, quote unquote, get back to the Constitution.
You know, you talked about that era in the American frontier. That also is not coincidentally the era of some of the greatest expansion in human progress and in the standard of living and some of the elimination of suffering. It happened during the 1800s. I mean, that's all you have to do is just look back at, and this was done during, I guess, what you could consider a do-nothing era. But
I mean,
the narrative is usually that, well, if the government doesn't do it, everybody will just be dying and starving in the streets. But that didn't happen.
oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll give you a real quick thing as we wrap up here. So my oldest son, who's a fourth grader in the state of Indiana, they always have to do an Indiana history project their fourth grade year, and so it's on the frontier and pioneer era in Indiana. And he had to specifically explore the importance of knives, flatboats, and log cabins. And so I'm helping him with this project, and we're reading about like what it took to build a log cabin, and we're having a discussion, and I'm like, could you imagine? And he's like, no, that would be really hard. I mean, to have to find the perfect log, to shave the bark off, to notch it, to chink it, to, build it with a stove and a window and just all the different ways. But you know what? There was no government agency telling them to do that. There was no government agency regulating the way that they did that. There was no government agency taxing them every step along the way and making sure that every house met regulations. And there were no HOAs, and there were no, just all on and on and on of how burdened we are with the government today. This was spirit of ingenuity. This was, hey, we've got a problem. Let's go solve it. We don't want to get attacked by bears. We would like to stay dry. We would like to stay, somewhat insulated from the elements. This is a lot of hard work, but look at how well it paid off, right? And how well it helped them progress in their lives. And again, that was ingenuity and spirit on their part.
Yeah, you would think that if you look back at the population numbers from that time period, that it would just be stagnant, if not declining, that nobody would be able to survive. No, it's like doubling and tripling in record time. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mike, I had a lot of fun with this episode.
Yeah, me too.
I hope the listeners really enjoy it. We'll start to wrap it up here for tonight, and really appreciate again the effort that you went through there to kind of source all that, and hopefully it kind of engage the listener a little bit on thinking these things through as you hear them, and really not just taking things at face value, and again understanding the roles that government play in our lives and what each aspect of our government should be doing and should be up to. So that's going to wrap it up for us here tonight. Mike, you have anything else before we close?
No.
All right.
I'm good.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for tuning in to us this evening, and we hope to catch you again next week on the other side.
Thanks for listening. And remember, you're not fully informed until you've heard the other side.